UFC Fight Night Shanghai Walker versus Zhang takes place in a couple of hours, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main event, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card. And this card is pretty stacked. However, I am going to warn you, I've tried to do this a couple of times over. I keep getting a lot of them mixed up. Okay? I'm just keeping it very real. This may not be my most intricate breakdown. There may be some mistakes over previous opponents. Who knows? I'm getting some of them mixed up, okay? But I'm trying. I'm going to start with the early prelim opener of Uran Satybaldiev versus Diyar Nurgozhay. I'm going to go with Uran Satybaldiev. I actually think his performance against Martin Buday... Listen, in hindsight, I thought that's pretty good. He actually did pretty good against Martin Buday on short notice. Now, I think he's going to be in a little bit less pot-belly shape than this when he makes his light heavyweight debut, because he is a light heavyweight. He fought Martin Buday on short notice at heavyweight. And in hindsight, that looks pretty good, because at the time I was thinking, yuck, you just lost to Martin Buday. That makes you awful. When in reality, yes, it does, but it doesn't make you the most awful out of all of the UFC fighters we've seen. Diyar Nurgozhay, on the other hand, fought against Brenson Ribeiro and actually he kind of plodded forward. He's pretty slow. I don't see much of a back foot game from him. He plods forward. He has a tick that's really bad. Now, I'm going to have a bit of a conspiracy about him. He did not look in this level of shape in his UFC debut. In fact, this is still a little bit flabby for him. He looked a little bit better shape on the regional scene, and I did notice that he wasn't ticking as much on the regional scene as well. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the guy constantly scratches at his eye non-stop throughout the fight. And I heard that steroids can be taken to stop tics and to help with Tourette's. Certain steroids. I wonder if because he stopped taking them, he's now ticking like fucking crazy, and he's also lost a little bit of definition. So I'm going to go over Uran Satybaldiev. Diyar Nurgozhay just looked very simple to defeat against Brenson Ribeiro. He had some moments of success. It wasn't a one-sided win from Brenson Ribeiro. He just looked very simple and easy to do stuff against. And I think Uran Satybaldiev is pretty okay at floating around on the back foot. He's pretty fluid. I think he flows a lot better than Diyar Nurgozhay in his striking. I don't think either of them are really going to out-grapple each other that much. And Uran Satybaldiev's fought better comp on the regional scene as well. We move on. This video is, of course, sponsored by Prize Picks. Play $5, get $50 instantly in lineups. Claim your $50 now, and you got to use code GURU when you sign up as a new member to make sure that you can get this as well. We've also got what I'm going to do this card. I'm taking Johnny Walker, shock twist, to fight for less than 4.75 minutes fight time. Shock, I know. I'm also taking Charles Johnson to land more than 62.5 significant strikes. And I'm taking Sergei Pavlovich and Waldo Cortes-Acosta combined to land less than 70.5 significant strikes combined, that is. I think this is pretty good this week. Use code GURU at prizepicks.com. We get back to breaking down the card. We've got Xiao Long versus Suyuong. Now, this is where things get mixed up a bit. Suyuong in his last fight defeated a good friend of Bryce Mitchell's in a AJ Cunningham. And he actually out-grappled him very easily throughout the fight. And this is a guy who's a training partner of Bryce Mitchell, so he's no stranger to a good grappler, you know. I think Suyuong looked really, really good against an American opponent, and that's what this is going to come down to, really. Xiao Long, you know, he had a split decision to Hyung Suk Hyo. I'm just guessing. Ju Seung Yu, it was a Sung Hyung KO, was the Korean Tiger with the giant head that got rocked and finished by Hyder Emil. That was the guy's name. He went to a split decision with him on Road to UFC, but that guy didn't end up being anything special, so I don't really know what that means. But I just haven't seen Xiao Long against non-Asian competition. And until then, I don't really know if you've got it or not. And I'm just going to be real. Now, I know this is also Asian competition, so it's not like this is going to be a difference for Xiao Long, but I just think Suyuong has been proven against a non-Asian. And a lot of the Road to UFC guys, they fight Asian comp. And let's face it, it is just an Asian-only competition where they make sure to get an Asian into the UFC. Sometimes on the Contender Series, it doesn't work. Sometimes they just sign them up straight away and they lose. So it's a bit of an Asian on Asian competition, whereas Suyuong Yu, I've seen it work against an American with a wrestling background, and he out-grappled the guy. So I think he's more specialized. I think he's better at one thing than Zhao Long is at a couple different things. The way I see this is Suyuong Yu is a prospect with some kind of like specialist ability, and he's actually pretty good, whereas Zhao Long seems to be a well-rounded MMA scrapper of the Asian regional scene, and I'm going to go with Suyuong Yu for that reason. We move on up the card to another fight. Yizha versus Westin Wilson. I'm going to go with Yizha. I don't think he looked that bad against Gabriel Santos, who I think is really good. If you look back at his Lerone Murphy fight now, I mean, Lerone Murphy's about to fight for a world championship, and, you know, that's a pretty good, and that was a very close fight between him and Lerone Murphy. And Yizha, he lost to Gabriel Santos, and he did lose every round, but he stayed in there, and he gave it some competitiveness, whereas Westin Wilson, although he does have some wins, I just don't trust it, man. He has a very side-on style. I think it leaves him very open for things in these lower weight classes. I think in the heavier divisions, you can have that sort of like MVP, Wonderboy step. Westin Wilson doesn't do a lot of it, but he tries to mix it in sometimes. But in the lower weight classes, these guys are so fast. They will cover the distance and catch that chin. So I'm going to go with Yizha. Westin Wilson, of course, the loss to Gene Silver isn't aging too badly. The loss to Joe Anderson Brito isn't aging that badly either, although Joe Anderson wasn't really what we thought he was. But there's no shame in getting finished early by those guys, because that's why they fight that way. They look for that first round finish. I think Yizha can do the same thing. I've seen Westin Wilson finish a few times. He's 36, 38 years old. Yizha's got a lot of experience. He actually got more experience than Westin Wilson, a much better record. He's fought some decent competition. Not all that much of it, though. But I'm going to go with Yizha to get a KO over Westin Wilson, to be honest with you. There's just certain fighters I won't take to win fights, and Westin Wilson's one of them, in my opinion. We move on. Michel Pereira versus Kyle Daukuas. This is on the prelims of this card. They're really doing Michel Pereira pretty dirty here. I'm going to take him to beat Kyle Daukuas, though. This should be a pretty easy first-round finish for Michel Pereira. I think he's on another level to Kyle Daukuas. Kyle Daukuas is pretty good, though. He's been racking up some wins. Getting back in the UFC, of course, he had mixed results in the UFC. He had that head clash with Kevin Holland, and then ended up choking out Kevin Holland, and that got overturned because Kevin Holland was more of a name than him, so they overturned it. I know if Holland had pulled that off against him, they would have cut Daukuas and called it a win for Holland, but it's all good. They head clashed. Daukuas choked him out. That's a good win of his, but it's not really a win, is it? Because he did head clash him. It was a 50-50 head clash, though, so I don't know what to say. Maybe they should have stopped it as the head clash happened, but the ref is just blind to it, I guess, and he just overturned his win. I don't really know what to say about Daukuas. He's all right, but I just don't see the standout ability in one area. And this is a 3-round fight. Right, I'm back. And I'm going with Michel Pereira, if I'm not mistaken, before that break. Because I think he just specializes in one area more than Daukuas is okay in a few different areas. Do I think that this is just like a lamb for slaughter for Michel Pereira? I don't. Like, this could get into the later rounds, and we could see Daukuas pick up a bit of the pace in the clinch, maybe. He could start doing some work to Michel Pereira. He's all right in the clinch. From what I've seen from Daukuas, he's got a bit of a body type for it as well. But I'm going to go with Michel Pereira, man. I think he's just way better than him at striking. Way better, and he moves well. And being light on your feet at middleweight can actually take you pretty far. Maybe not against a guy who's going to drown you like Anthony Hernandez to where you'll gas after 4 minutes because you're a professional MMA fighter. But it will at least take you past Kyle Daukuas, as it took him past Andre Petroski and a lot of other fighters that he's folded in that division. So I'm going to go with Michel Pereira to win. Even though his last fight against Abbas Magomedov wasn't the best look, it is what it is. Abbas is pretty good. We move on. Up the card, Rongzhu, this is another one, versus Austin Hubbard. Damn, he actually looks pretty small here. I mean, if they're the same height, I'm going to go Rongzhu, yeah, but I didn't realize how, like, weirdly, like, petite he looks. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, he genuinely does look all tucked in on the body and the arms. And, dude, these guys, Austin Hubbard's listed as taller than him. When Hubbard's not this yoked. Hubbard's soft. No, I don't believe this Photoshop that they've done here. I have no idea what's going on with the two of them. That ain't Hubbard's body, dude. That ain't Hubbard's torso, and I don't know what's going on with Rongzhu and how he's been shrunk from the neck down, but it's all good. I'm I'm going to go with Rongzhu to win this fight. I think eventually you have to go against Austin Hubbard. I think Rongzhu is more talented. He works well on the back foot. I think he's a bit of a big favorite here, I'll be honest with you. I think he should be a very slight favorite over Austin Hubbard. So there is a lot of value on Austin Hubbard here. But I think Rongzhu is a more specialized fighter, and he's a young fighter as well. You know, he's 25 years old, which a lot of people don't really think of because they see 26-6 and all of these pro fights that he's had and think that he's fought for a long time. You know, we've seen him on Road to UFC. We've seen him on the Contender Series. We've seen him in the UFC as well. And he's had some mixed results. I think this is the one that got his eye swollen shut by Padilla, who's actually a very underrated lightweight prospect himself that I think needs a little bit more respect. So I don't think that's a bad loss. And, you know, it was an elbow to the eye. He was doing all right before that. It is what it is. It was a close fight. But, yeah, he got finished with the eye to the elbow to the eye, made his eye swell up, and they had to stop the fight. Since then, he beat Cody Steele, I believe. And he looked pretty good over the distance against him. Austin Hubbard's had mixed results recently with some unks. You know what I mean? Now, I do think he had a pretty close fight with Alexander Hernandez that I think looks pretty good for him. But I think at this point, Rongzhu should sneak by Austin Hubbard in a 29-28 decision where Hubbard wins the third round. That's what I think is going to happen here. Rongzhu first 2 rounds. Austin Hubbard in the third round. 29-28 Rongzhu. We move on. Up the card, Charles Johnson versus Lona Kavanaugh. Now, you guys know I'm a sucker for an English prospect. Okay? Charles Johnson, I think, is going to get the upset win here. He's going to get the upset win. Now, I need to cleanse my dry mouth here. But Charles Johnson's going to get the upset win, in my opinion. He's an underdog. He's plus 170. I don't think Lona Kavanaugh is as wide of a margin away from his last 2 opponents as people seem to think that he is. And I don't know why people are acting like that. The Jose Ochoa fight was an extremely close fight. Now, I know that Jose Ochoa is pretty good. And he fought, you know, the guy from that region that's just going to grapple the whole time like a bitch. And he looked all right in that fight, although he did get out-grappled and out-controlled and hit with some good shots himself of ground and pound here and there. The guy stayed busy on top. Weren't really damaging Ochoa, but you know that style. Lona Kavanaugh, though, he fought Ochoa on short notice, and he really did struggle with him. And Ochoa's, like, not as long and rangy as Johnson, but he is kind of. He's there. You know, and Johnson's experienced, and Johnson has good wins, and you ain't going to out-grapple Johnson as, like, a plan B, which is what happened with Lona Kavanaugh and his last opponent, Felipe Dos Santos. Now, I know Felipe Dos Santos did very well against Manel Cap, and that's why that win for Lona Kavanaugh was seen as very impressive. But I don't think Felipe Dos Santos is all that. And sometimes guys just have a good debut performance. Maybe you could say the same about Ochoa for his fight with Kavanaugh. But you know what? As much as I want Lona Kavanaugh to win, I've been following his career since he got that fucking nasty KO at Cage Warriors with the step in, step out, step back in again with a 1-2. It was one of the nastiest KOs you'll ever see. He has a spinning back kick KO to the face on one of his opponents as well. But then there's some other decisions, man. When he steps that level of competition up and he doesn't get that finish. When it goes to decision, he really does. And they have him at 5'6" on the UFC website. Tapology has him at 5'4". When you see it go towards the decision area and we start getting into the second and third round, it does feel like Lona Kavanaugh can be pushed around a little bit and broken down a little bit. And maybe the pressure can start to get to him if someone puts it on him for 3 straight rounds. And Charles Johnson can fucking do that. And he's hard to out-grapple, extremely hard to out-grapple effectively. That is, okay? Very, very hard to out-grapple effectively to where you're going to get his back or to where you're going to, like, choke him out or to where you're going to get a submission attempt locked in or land really massive ground and pound strikes. Typically, if you want to out-grapple Charles Johnson, you kind of have to make it a stinker wet blanket over and over again and shoot takedowns over and over again situation like Makayev did or Durden did. But other than that, I don't think Lona Kavanaugh has the offensive grappling to do that to Johnson. And Johnson's knocked out Joshua Van, you know? And Johnson's had some really close fights that arguably should have gone his way. And he lost to Temerov, and Temerov's now tested positive for PEDs. And that was a very close fight as well. And all of the Johnson fights, typically in general, seem to go a certain direction of him having a really good third round. And I think he'll be able to survive Lona Kavanaugh, and his range and awkwardness and kicks, I think, are going to give Lona Kavanaugh some problems. So Lona Kavanaugh could chin him, but I don't see him beating Johnson by decision. So I'm going to say Johnson wins a decision based on a close second round and then a third round of like really good success on the feet where Kavanaugh's surviving and failing takedowns to stay in the fight. But I think Lona Kavanaugh will start a very good first round, but I don't know, man. Kavanaugh has some really nasty finishes, but in between those moments and in between some of the ground and pound that he had against Felipe Dos Santos, I am concerned in some ways that he's not as far ahead of the pack as other fighters have been at flyweight that have still been fraud checked by Charles Johnson. So I'm going to go with Charles Johnson getting this one done. I think Lona Kavanaugh's a little bit too young and inexperienced. I reckon he'll be back. I reckon he'll be back in the rankings. I think he'll be a ranked prospect of the future and be a top 10 guy at some point, mainstay of the top 10. But I think Johnson gets the upset here. I think Johnson has been one of the fighters recently where I've been thinking, yeah, he's one of the more underrated guys on the roster. And I think he'll beat Lona Kavanaugh by decision. We move on. Maheshate versus Gage Young. I'm going to go with... Who the fuck is that guy on the left? That looks nothing like Maheshate. Am I off? What's going on? What is wrong with these bodies? Like, what? They're the same... I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's an Asian thing, but... This is like Photoshop, no? What happened to Maheshate? This isn't the guy I remember. I guess the shaved head. He looks Kazakhstani now compared to before. But either way, he's not far off, to be fair. He's from China. I'm going to go with Gage Young over Maheshate. Was Maheshate the guy that got elbowed by Padilla? No, he wasn't. Who the fuck was this Asian guy? I don't even know all the... Maheshate. Who the fuck is this one? Gage Young's going to win. He had a pretty good fight with Quillen Sal killed. Maheshate's pretty 50-50 in the UFC. They've actually got Gage Young as a bit of a favorite here as well. And I think it's swayed that way. So I'm actually going to go with Gage Young. I thought he looked pretty good on the Contender Series. He fought Evan Elder in his debut, which is a fucking rough debut because Evan Elder is all non-stop action, massive power. And it's hard to sort of get momentum against him at any point. But Gage Young still did okay in the third round there. He builds as fights go on, typically. And I think he'll be able to do that against Maheshate, who hasn't had that level of competition against Quillen Sal killed, Evan Elder. These are good guys that I think would beat Maheshate pretty easily. Although I can't for the fucking life of me remember a Maheshate fight. Because I've looked up 50 Asians on this card and they're all... I don't know which one this is. Who's Maheshate? I know he's shit. I know he's 50-50. I know he's beat no one good and lost to some shitters. But that's every one of them on this card, so I don't know how that separates him. So I'm going to go Gage Young, because I don't know this guy. Who this guy? He's going to lose. We move on. Oh, fucking hell. Tayiilake Nueraji versus Kiefer Crosbie. Kiefer Crosbie's shit. I'm going with this other guy, Tayiilake Nueraji. You know, it'd be really annoying. Imagine being a legit prospect outside the UFC that's putting together some, like, record. And then seeing, like, Kiefer Crosbie still in the UFC. That'd fucking piss me off. No offense to Kiefer Crosbie, but I think you're pretty shit at MMA. And I think you're pretty easy to figure out. And I think rangier opponents typically give him problems, especially with the kicks. And Tayiilake Nueraji is a very tall, lanky opponent. Likes to use kicks at range. And is very rangy and lanky. I was about to call him ranky. Massive favorite, Tayiilake Nueraji for a reason. I think Kiefer Crosbie's pretty shit, but he's got all right boxing, I guess. But his chin's not all that, so I don't know. I'm gonna have to go with Tayiilake Nueraji. I just don't believe in Kiefer Crosbie as a fighter, and his physique completely changed when he got into the UFC testing pool. We move on. Up the card, Mudaerji versus Kevin Borjas. I'm going to go with Mudaerji over Kevin Borjas. I know Kevin Borjas is seen as pretty good, and he is all right, you know. He's got some hands. He's a little bit of a Edson Barboza of the flyweight division, if you look at him. Or at least Edson Barboza's face is turning into his over time with all the damage that he's taken. But I'm going to go with Mudaerji. I think his range is going to be a problem for Kevin Borjas, who's, let's face it, a little bit of a 1-2 merchant in that division. He got a big win over Ronaldo Rodriguez. Which is what's his kind of like claim to recent, not fame, but like a win. His claim to a recent win, I guess, is his win over Ronaldo Rodriguez. But Ronaldo Rodriguez is shit. But Ronaldo Rodriguez had about as close of a fight against Ode Osborne as Steve Erceg. Of course, there were situations there that unfolded. You know, Ode showed up lean at 135. Erceg was a 125 weight, and then he fought at 135. So Ode probably had about 8 pounds of muscle on him. But still, I think Ronaldo Rodriguez is pretty shit, though. And he still made it pretty competitive with Kevin Borjas. I'm going to go with Mudaerji. His chin's good for a longer, lankier guy. Rangy, lankier guy for the division. And I thought he looked pretty good against Charles Johnson. Now, maybe he did look good against him in hindsight because he's also long and rangy, which is Charles Johnson's thing that makes him kind of good for the division. And Mudaerji maybe kind of took that away. So I think that Mudaerji is pretty good. I think he fights very well against shorter opponents. He can make the fight very low output, and I think that will benefit him against Kevin Borjas because it will become a single shot fight where they have to find each other at range. And I don't think Kevin Borjas has the ability to do that. In the big cage in China, I think Mudaerji is going to rise to the occasion and beat Kevin Borjas, who's had some moments. You know, he had a moment against Joshua Van in the first round of their fight where they got a little competitive and shots were flying, but I just don't think he's got the ability to find Mudaerji at range. I don't see it. So I'm going to go with Mudaerji getting this one done by decision. 30-27. A little bit of a schooling victory for Mudaerji here is what I'm seeing. We move on. Sergei Pavlovich versus Waldo Cortes-Acosta. I'm going to go with Sergei Pavlovich over Waldo Cortes-Acosta. I just realized that Sergei, and it doesn't look like this based on their pictures at all, Sergei Pavlovich has a 14-inch reach advantage. I don't believe that Waldo Cortes-Acosta's got 70-inch reach. I don't believe it for a second. He does not have a 70-inch reach. What's this billion-dollar company listing shit? I reckon Waldo Cortes-Acosta's probably got a 78-inch reach. So Sergei's got that reach on everyone at heavyweight, it seems. Long-ass arms, wide shoulders, can fight out of the pocket while you're in the pocket. It's kind of insane he did that to Derek Lewis. I reckon he beats Waldo Cortes-Acosta, and it's one of those ones where there's really not much else to say. He's more athletic, he's faster. Maybe Waldo Cortes-Acosta actually has faster. I disagree. Sergei's faster, he's more powerful. He's shown more ability against lower ranked guys. You know, I don't like to see you barely get past Sergei Spivak in a striking match. And then what I'm supposed to pick you to beat Sergei Pavlovich. I don't see that happening. So I'm gonna have to go with Sergei Pavlovich to win this fight. And I'm going to go with Sergei Pavlovich to win this fight by KO. And I think that my thing of the less than a certain amount of strikes will work here because I'm going to take Sergei Pavlovich to beat Waldo Cortes-Acosta. Nasty KO win, first round. The Sergei Pavlovich of old is what I'm looking for here. I also think if it comes to it, he can use grappling here as well. He can use low kicks here as well. I watched fucking Josh Parisian do well against Waldo Cortes-Acosta and arguably win. So, like, what are we doing at heavyweight? I don't know. But we're chucking these guys up. We're giving them a challenge. See if Sergei can win it. I reckon Sergei's got this one in the bag. And I think if he was on the feet with Sergei Spivak, he would knock him the fuck out. And if he was on the feet with Marcin Tybura or someone of that level at heavyweight, he would knock them the fuck out early. And that's the difference between him and Waldo Cortes-Acosta. You know, Waldo Cortes-Acosta's had a couple close decisions against some unranked guys that I know Sergei had fucking walked straight through and finished within a minute. So, you know, Volkov outschooled and pointed Pavlovich, and Aspinall caught him on the chin. Those are two of the guys that can do that, and I don't think Waldo Cortes is either of them. So I'm going to go with Sergei by first round KO. I think this is going to be an early finish. He gets hit a few times, I imagine. Probably gets a bit scrappy, and then that wakes him up, and he starts catching Waldo and then puts him away. In my opinion, that's what's going to happen anyway. We move on. Up the card to another fight. Brian Ortega versus Aljamain Sterling. This is now a catchweight bout. Brian Ortega extremely unprofessional. Doesn't cut enough body fat, it seems, in the build-up of these fights at all. Always shows up with that excess body fat, and then I don't know. He's been struggling with weight recently. He's been saying he wants to move up to 155, and they didn't really let him do that because they wanted him at 145, and they were like, "You're all right, shut up." I think somebody at 155 turned him down, and Ortega was saying, "I'm not gonna I'm not going to expose them for turning me down because they're a legend. But I don't think they turned him down because they're scared of Brian Ortega. I think they turned him down because what the fuck does a Brian Ortega win for a top 10 lightweight guy do for them right now? Especially a legend, if he says that, like Poirier or Gaethje. Like, that does nothing for them. So why would the fuck would they fight Brian Ortega? But I'm going to go with Aljamain Sterling. I think the odds have massively swayed after the weigh-ins. I don't know if you guys saw the weigh-ins. Either Brian Ortega's pulling a fast one on Aljamain Sterling here and he's going to look the best he's ever looked, or he is fucking cooked for this fight, and I could see Aljo getting a fucking KO on the feet because Brian Ortega was a zombie at the weigh-ins. Walking out there like... He looked like Ben Askren taking his fucking first steps, and I don't mean that as like a joke. Like, he genuinely looked that out of it. I felt like DC was going to come start playing disc golf next to him. That's how bad Brian Ortega looked. Standing up at the weigh-ins. So I'm going to have to go with Aljamain Sterling. I can't pick a guy that looked that bad the day before the fight to win. Maybe Brian Ortega's doing some light skin shit and, you know, he's actually going to have a phenomenal performance, but this will add to his story of how he wasn't expected to have the phenomenal performance and he was just adding it up. I don't know if he's like playing it up a bit. I'm not sure. Seems like Ortega does that sometimes where he's like, you know, I'm really not feeling it. I feel like a lot of times Ortega's just not been feeling it on fight week. Maybe it's just a terrible weight cut to 145 for him, but I'm going to have to go with Aljamain Sterling, more disciplined, more professional, probably as good in the grappling, maybe not in terms of like catching a submission, especially not off of his back, but I'd say that Aljamain Sterling has better wrestling and positional grappling than Brian Ortega, and we saw with Volkanovski, even though he got caught in a couple subs, when he did just positionally grapple against Ortega, he did do pretty well against him, so I think Aljamain Sterling can do that as well. And, you know, Aljo had a really good performance against Movsar Evloev, where I do think he lost. But, you know, he just shaved his mustache off. So extra control time points are being given out this card. Yeah, and I think Aljo's going to score this win over Brian Ortega. I think this is going to be a big win for Aljo. I think it's going to be a decision win. I could even see a ground and pound situation. I think he will dominate positionally in the grappling and avoid shooting in the open on a single leg or a double leg. I think he'll look for like pushing Ortega up against a cage, getting to the back, dragging him down, working from there. And I think he'll do well on the feet as well because Ortega's looked a bit lost on the feet in moments too. So I'm going to go with Aljamain Sterling getting this one done by decision, 29-28. We move on. Johnny Walker versus Zhang Mingyang. I'm going to have to go with Zhang Mingyang. I can't trust Johnny Walker to get hit on the chin by a professional fighter. I don't trust it. Johnny Walker is a light heavyweight or heavyweight from the UFC, where if he was in a bar fight with me, 2-on-2, I'd worry. Where I'm taking on my guy and Johnny Walker's taking on his, he could get chinned. Like, he could genuinely get chinned by some fucking geezer in the pub. Oh, go on, laddie. Oh, what are you doing here, pally? And just knocked out Johnny Walker badly while half drunk. I can't trust Johnny Walker's chin. I just simply can't do it. And no matter how many times you think, he won't get KO'd again, he does. He does get KO'd again. Or he just doesn't fight well. And he stays on the back foot and just loses a decision instead. Now, I picked him to beat Anthony Smith, of course. I think Anthony Smith's dog shit. Always has been. But I just can't pick him to pick a power puncher that's got all of his recent finishes by first round KO. I know that Zhang Mingyang has a lot of losses on his record, 19-6. So you may be saying, well, he's lost so many times. Like, what do you mean you can't see Johnny Walker possibly getting a win? That was a long time ago in Zhang Mingyang's career. And since then, he's been on a spree. Every win he has is a KO. And all of them are in the first round. And I'm taking this guy to beat Johnny Walker the way he found the punch on Brenson Ribeiro, who's got long, rangy arms and is a taller guy for the division. I just think Zhang Mingyang is a master at finding those shots, and I think Johnny Walker is chinny enough to get put down by those shots, and I think that's going to lead to a massive first-round victory for Zhang Mingyang. I could see Johnny Walker trying to grapple here. That could be a bit of an X factor here where Johnny Walker maybe grappled like he did against Kutalaba and Krylov a little bit. He started grappling and he did okay in some moments there with dominant position and was able to pick him up with like big strength movements. But in terms of when they're firing in the pocket, which I know is going to happen, Zhang Mingyang should catch Johnny Walker on the chin in the first round 8 out of 10 times that these guys fight. So I'm going to go with Zhang Mingyang getting this one done by first round KO. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye. Made it through that one. Fucking, I'm dying, by the way. I'm literally dying. But we're good.